If you're a CFO or a CEO, you could really care less about how many people opened an email.
You want that person to, fill out that lead form. You want that person to make that transaction. And that truly is what your measure of success should be, right?
Is there a reason why you think organizations so often get focused on those vanity metrics and don't focus on the actual purchase activity?
One example that comes to mind,
In today's episode, we'll be talking to Alex Corzo. He's co-founder and head of digital communications for Smart Panda Labs. We're going to be able to talk today about what the post-click experience is and why it's such an important factor in making an impact in marketing campaigns. We're going to talk about why focusing on the post-click experience is important in communicating the impact of marketing all the way up to the C-suite. And we'll talk about personalization and how personalization plays a key role in driving that post-click experience. Then finally, we'll wrap it up by talking about a real-life example of how we helped a Fortune 5000 organization do this and actually implement a powerful post-click experience. Let's dive in. Well, Alex, thanks for the chat today. Appreciate the time. Looking forward to getting into this with you.
Thank you.
So first off, we talk about the post-click experience. We talk about post-click optimization. How do you define that?
So for me, I think it's all about the user experience, really, right? So it's what you're serving up and showing that customer or that prospect along their journey to potentially what it is that you want them to do, right? So this goes not only for your prospects and leads, but also your customers, right? Because retention is equally important. So what are you doing to basically aid them in moving down whatever sales or conversion funnel that's important to you? I think it's crucial, first and foremost, because your customers are expecting it, right? And nowadays, it's expected. It is what it is. There's that big brother mentality is no more. I think clients and customers they want that, right? That they want that personalization. Secondly, your competition is doing it. So, that says something. And so if you're not doing it, then you're more than likely going to be left behind. And I think ultimately, your success relies on it. It truly does. And with that, it allows you, if done correctly, you can reduce costs, increase revenue, and that's why I feel, that's why it's important. And that's how we're defining it.
I think that's a great definition. I think that really helps people to see and think about the post-click experience in a way that perhaps they haven't before. I know you and I have been on many conversations with people about the post-click experience. And one way I always frame it, I take it back to my childhood, right? I think about the experience I had as a kid, getting picked up from school from my mom, her telling me, hey, we have to go to the store. I have to stop and I have to go shopping, and how much I dreaded that. I dreaded whenever that happened. It was like, Mom, I gotta get home. Like, I gotta get my cartoons. I get homework done. Like, you're delaying this whole experience. And the reason I dreaded it so much is because I knew it would oftentimes take forever. Because how long would it take for her to get to the store, find someone who could actually be helpful to her, find the thing she's looking for? Can she find it in her size? Is someone gonna be at the register? And that has nothing to do with the commercial she saw or what she heard on the radio that got her into the store. It happened when she got to the store, she had this experience, and how positive or negative was that going to be to actually get her to make that purchase and get me home so I could watch Transformers or G.I. Joe or whatever was coming on that afternoon, right? So people don't think about that, but that experience after the ad has always been so critically important. And just as you mentioned, now in the digital age, there's just a much, much higher expectation because people are just so much more in control. And you said something that was really important, and I'd love for you to dig into it a little bit more. You mentioned personalization being really important in the digital experience. How do you see the role of personalization in post-click experiences?
I think personalization, I believe that personalization really truly plays a vital role, right, in the experience of the user. Nowadays, it's more than just knowing the customer's name or even their past behaviors, right? So we obviously have, to our advantage, tons of data nowadays on our leads and our customers. But I think it's going beyond that. I think what we are now capable and having to do is we need to anticipate their next move, right? We need to ensure that we're greeting them where they are, and basically give them what they need in order to move down that funnel. So in the perfect example of, you as a child, for your mom, it's like what do you know? What do these organizations and companies know about your mom? How can they make that experience easy and, frictionless, for lack of a better word, so that basically your mom gets what she wants with a positive experience and, within a timely manner. So I think those are elements that I think we as marketers or as digital experts now have to basically focus on in order for us to be, better than the competition, right? We need to be ahead of the curve. And that's truly where we need to spend our time, right? Is that anticipation.
I'm curious, as an expert in the field, when you think about personalization and you think about kind of the challenges, the problems that organizations have in terms of delivering personalization, do you think it's more about they're not getting the right data to be able to personalize the experience? Or do you think they have the data, it's just they don't know what to do with it to personalize the experience? Or maybe even the answer is both, but kind of what comes to your mind?
Yeah, sure. I would say probably both, but I would definitely probably put more emphasis on the fact that they probably have the data, but they're probably not using it correctly, right? As we know, there's hundreds, if not close to thousands, of data points that we could potentially look at for any one given customer. So I think it's important to understand what that data means in relation to your sales process, where your user is, and how you're using that to effectively then turn that into something that a customer would essentially see, right? How are you using that data to your advantage? And I think that that's probably a big miss for organizations, that they're not just looking they're not looking at the correct metrics or that those data points to make those decisions.
Yeah, something that you've always kind of drilled into me, I know, is when it comes to that experience, in particular, your area of focus is really around lifecycle marketing, right? Those different touch points that happen, especially when we're pushing out messaging like SMS and email or even print messaging being triggered, is that people often kind of think about that. They'll leverage data, but then they'll end up focusing on vanity metrics, right? So it's how many pieces did we send out? How many people open the email? How many people click through? But you've always drilled into me like, well, none of that matters if no one actually ends up buying, right?
Exactly.
Like people have to actually end up purchasing. Um, when you think about that, is there a reason why you think organizations so often get focused on those vanity metrics? Why they focus so much on opens and clicks and sends and so forth, and don't focus on the actual kind of the actual purchase activity?
I think it's very similar to the billboard mentality. It's just like how many eyeballs saw this, and the greater the number, the greater the success, right? And in the digital world, that's not true. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important. Obviously, I mean, I think like looking at metrics like open rate or click through rate, even like website metrics like time spent on site or that visitation. Those are all very important, right? And the more you increase those, obviously, the more likely you're going to get to that transaction. But when you're looking at the success of a particular campaign or an email communication or an SMS strategy, like you got to take it to the very end. What is that end result? What is the goal of that particular piece of communication, right? You want that person to, fill out that lead form. You want that person to make that transaction. And that truly is what your measure of success should be, right? Like don't stop at those vanity metrics, right? You take it all the way to the very end, right? So you could truly see the impacts of these particular marketing campaigns you have in market. So I am a firm believer in that, and sometimes it is difficult for organizations to get that, that connection, right? All the way from maybe like a marketing platform all the way to, commerce site or something like that. But it's worth the time and investment to connect those dots because that's truly that's what's adding to your bottom line, right? Not, 50%, or 75% open rate. It truly is that end goal that you should be focusing on.
It's funny you say that. One of the issues that we both often see with marketers, both in organizations we both worked for and now clients that we have today, is that marketing people tend to do a very poor job of elevating what they're doing and their metrics up to the C suite to say, this is why this should matter to you, right? Because if you're a CFO or CEO, you could really care less about how many people opened an email, how many people clicked through an email. That is completely irrelevant to you. You're looking at not just revenue, you're looking at profit margin, you're looking at cash flow, you're looking at valuation of the company, you're looking at stock price. And the things that marketers do ultimately do influence those C suite metrics. It's just marketers don't do a good job of making the connection. because we get focused on the vanity. We get focused on the impressions and how many people saw it. Like you mentioned, we get focused on that billboard mentality. And it's just so important to make that connection and say, how is this ultimately driving revenue? How is this reducing costs that we're driving profitability? How is this helping to grow the lifetime value of the customer, to increase customer retention so that we're influencing things like the value of the company? How is this shortening the buying cycle so we're improving cash flow for the organization, right? All those things are being influenced specifically by that post-click experience, but either A, marketers don't focus on it, or they focus on it, but they don't tell the story and say, this is why it should matter. And then they don't end up getting that investment. Um, what other challenges have you seen, like mistakes do you see when it comes to marketers and really looking at that post-click experience?
Ooh, I think one of the things that I come across a lot in our world with our clients is and it's what I feel is like one of the common mistakes is that I see that marketers at these organizations often think that prospects and customers know as much as they do about their products or services. I think that they get in the mindset of I've been this is what I know, and they know a lot more, right? They know a lot more than you and I, even as a partner agency, or and then obviously the customer at the tail end of that. So I think that's one of the biggest problems that problems or opportunities rather, right? That I feel like marketers need to basically disconnect themselves from the product and service, right? They truly, as old as the saying goes, is put yourselves in your customer's shoes, right? And I do feel like that happens less and less now, especially in the digital age, just because there's so much thrown at us and we're retaining so much information. I feel like marketers get stuck in that habit of like, well, the customer should know this because I know this, and that's obviously not the case. And it could be simple things like, where to find information or how to absorb it, or give, the weight of certain, details over others. And that's why I feel like, personalization and then layering that with experimentation truly gives you that arsenal to obviously get that person moving along the funnel in such an easy way, right? Removing yourself from the equation as somebody who understands, the product or service.
Thank you for that. Yeah. We're talking about this very broadly in terms of what we see across a multitude of organizations, right? A multitude of industries. But when you compare different industries, what kind of differences have you seen? I know you've worked with retail, you've worked with healthcare, you've worked with higher ed, you've worked with real estate. Do you see similarities and do you see differences as you kind of go across those industries? I'd love for you to speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely similarities, right? If you think of just the customer journey as, kind of the definitions of each of the pillars, right? Obviously we kind of like follow that model across any industries, but at the end of the day, it does vary wildly, by industry, especially at the tactical level, right? I do believe that it has to do almost entirely to the psyche of the customer, right? It's like, where is that customer? What product or service they're purchasing? Where did they originate their search from? What competition lies there? And then even when you're looking at, the differences of specific industries, you have to layer that perception, right? And that expectation that we started, basically talking about at the beginning of the call. Where is your user in the buying process, right? We might be looking at the same product, you and I, but I might be in my awareness stage. Like, what I'm saying? Like I am trying to figure out, like, is this even for me? And you might be at that decision making. It's that company and the competition. And one small thing can make you, veer one way or the other. So I think when you look at the journey, right, you have to understand first where is this customer of mine, right, or this prospect of mine in their sales process, right? What message am I delivering? And then it's kind of going back to what I was mentioning with your mom's example. It's like I need to anticipate what you're about to do and make sure that I or my message is the one that I'm serving, that you're seeing first and foremost, right? So it has to do with, basically just like understanding all those elements, applying your metrics, seeing what's working, and, obviously delivering, when the time is right. And it is going to be different, right? The channel, the message, the offer, there's so many components, right? And then I go back to just the testing, and the experimentation components of it. And that's allows you to obviously like maximize where you're going and making sure that your customers are converting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the example you went back to, again, going back to my scarred childhood with my mom dragging me around to different department stores in the 80s. You know, I think, if she's going in there and she's just looking to buy, a blouse or a pair of shoes, right? That's one thing, right? That's a decision that she can make relatively quickly. Relatively speaking, it's low cost. And how that salesperson treats that experience should be markedly different than I'm coming in here to buy a brand new washer and dryer, where she may be, maybe hopping around a little bit. Maybe she needs to come back and say, you know what, I need to bring my husband. He wanted to take a look at this too, so I need to come back this weekend. When he's free to come back with me. Right? Those are just two very different experiences, two very different salespeople who need to treat that very differently. And it's the same today. Again, we have clients that have a sales cycle that's hours. They maybe they need to buy something right away, kind of, client the Amazon world where, we both know the sales cycle for Amazon is very quickly. Today we might buy something from Amazon. It'll take us all of 10 minutes,
I already did this morning, actually.
that entire sales cycle, right? But if I'm going to buy something that's a larger purchase, we work with clients in higher education, their size sales cycles up to 3 weeks, right? That's a completely different experience that you're looking to optimize. Lifecycle marketing becomes much more critically important in that kind of situation because now you're trying to kind of nurture them along, making sure that you're pushing appropriate information to them at the right time in the right way. So now when you're thinking about this customer journey, as you really emphasized, it's like, okay, if a person's in awareness, what do we reasonably expect them to need to do at that point? Is it to make a purchase? Well, probably not. Especially if it's a longer sales cycle, it might just be, can we get their email address, right? Can we get them to subscribe so we can communicate with them? Or can we get their mobile numbers that we can text them? Whereas if I'm in the decision phase and I'm deeper into the customer journey, now all of a sudden my goal to get them to add to cart, to check out, those things become much, much more critically important. And as you mentioned, those things differ drastically, right, by industry in terms of understanding the buy-in cycle, understanding the psyche and the persona of the people that you're talking to, your target demographics and psychographics. So it's just super, super important. So because you've had such varied experience, both in your corporate life and now, working in the agency life, what are some experiences that you're proud of that you've set up and built that you feel like have really improved a client's post-click experience?
I think one example that comes to mind was a company that we worked with in the healthcare space, specifically around insurances having to do with Medicare. And if anybody listening to this understands that world, it's daunting, it's complex. It's a lot, especially for the target demographic that they're going after, right? So when I took a step back and when I understood what their end goal was, right? Which is obviously, to secure policies for, their customers and their prospects, right? I looked at that and I understood when I dug into it, it was like, okay, well, what's beyond that, what is more important, what is also important, and it's retention, right? In this world, where policies and providers are, a customer can change up to the very last minute, it was important to keep the customer engaged. So I preface all that with saying that with this particular client, education and nurturing was vital to their success. And it wasn't only leading up to them, securing a policy, but it was even more so important after the fact, right? It was retaining them because they had, X number of weeks to make a change in a market where you're being thrown advertising from every single angle in your mailbox, online, on the TV, like in the grocery store. So when we kind of flipped the model there, and instead of it being like sell, or like even nurture, it was like, let's maintain that cadence and that volume even post, right? Like, let's continue engaging them, educating them, teaching them how to use their new policy, like keeping them. And because of that strategy, their retention rates went up, right? And that's where they saw the true value because in that space, if your customer goes to another provider or another, with another policy or whatnot, you don't get that. The company we paid with or we worked with does not get paid, right? So all that effort to convert them and capture them was in vain if they weren't retained. And so when we when we flipped the narrative on the post conversion part of the journey, that's when they saw the true kind of like success of what we were able to help them with.
That's a good example. I'm glad you mentioned that because there was something that you really kind of helped me to see, right? I think one of the things that we've been able to do successfully that's been helpful when it comes to that post-click shopping, quote unquote in-store experience is put ourselves in the shoes of the person going into the store, right? Like we're there, right? Me going back to my childhood and saying like, I'm there, I'm in the store, I'm watching all this happen. And I think what you did that was really nice, and part of it is just the place that we are in our lives, right? Just generationally, is that we're dealing with parents who are dealing with these services. And one of the things that you pointed out very quickly is, hey, we have two big audiences here. First of all, we're talking to the people who are actually getting the insurance, right? Which could be people in their 60s and their 70s, and how you're going to communicate with them, how you're going to lay things out for them in the digital space is very definitive in terms of how that experience needs to be delivered. But then you're also talking to their kids who are a generation removed, who are savvier, right? Because both you and I, having older parents, we're the ones who had to deal with
Yeah,
the,
it's
the
so true.
Medicaids and the Medicares
Yeah,
of the world, right? It wasn't
yeah,
them. We're the ones who had to jump in and do it. So now our experience, even though it's for them, our experience doing that is dramatically different, right? Than it is for them doing it. So kind of going back to the point you made earlier, the importance of personalization, the importance of data, perhaps in that experience, one of the main things to do is to say, hey, first of all, can we figure out who we're talking to? Right? Maybe it's a simple assessment, a simple question at the beginning of the process to say, are you the person using this insurance? No, I'm not the person. Okay, well, what's your relationship to the person? I'm their son or daughter. Oh, well, you just told me that you're 20, 30, years younger than the person who's actually getting the insurance and qualifying. And that one piece of data, right? That one piece of personalization dramatically changes the experience you're going to have moving forward, or at least it should, right? Because that's so different in terms of how you're talking to people. And it kind of boggles my mind that people have such a hard time kind of putting themselves in the shoes of their customers and saying, hey, how would I feel um, if I was in this situation? And I kind of like the fact that we work across industry because sometimes people kind of, this happened many times. They'll come to us and be, well, what kind of experience do you have in, my industry? And sometimes it's like, well, we don't have very much, but that's actually a good thing, right? Because it gives us objectivity, right? You kind of put blinders on when you keep working with the same industry. It's like, well, this is the way things are done in X, right? This is the way things are done in healthcare. This is the way things are done in real estate. But it's like, but why? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. If I'm your customer and I'm coming, I don't understand why you're doing it like this. And I think maintaining that objectivity has been something that's really, I know, helped me in my career. How do you feel about that? Do you think that objectivity is really important?
definitely. Because I feel like we bring to the table potentially something that's closer to their customer, right? Someone who we need to go in there, we need to learn, absorb the product, we need to figure it out as a consumer, right? So I think that we bring kind of that faculty to the table, right? Whereas kind of to my previous example, where it's like marketers often kind of see it and they think that all their customers know it the way they do, right? And I do feel like working with an agency that might not necessarily have tons of experience in in your particular industry can benefit you, right? Because again, it's coming at with a French lens, asking questions that potentially your customers might be asking, and not taking for granted that we live in a world where, gosh, we are seeing advertising and emails, and we're on multiple websites a day, whether that be for our professional or personal lives. And it's just so much content. And so for us, it's looking at it again, kind of going back to that customers, from that initial lens, right? And I think that's probably one of my I couldn't agree with you more on that particular point.
Thank you. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for being on the inaugural episode of the Everything Clicks podcast. We appreciate that. Appreciate where the podcast can go, again, how it can help marketers really kind of guide and direct things moving forward. And hopefully you'll come back. We'll be able to chat again and catch up and kind of see what other things guests have said. Maybe talk about that a little bit more with you.
Yeah, perfect. I have one question for you, actually.
Yeah.
So in that experience with your mom, did you at least have a Walkman?
No.
Oh,
No, no, no Walkman, no. I don't even. There wasn't even a Game Boy yet. No, I just sat through the radio is all I had, and it wasn't like satellite radio, right? It was just like
Yeah.
it was just like the 4 or 5 stations that you can, like, get at that particular time, because at that point, it was actually safe to leave your kid in the car sometimes. Yeah, it was like the 4 or 5 stations I got, like, at that particular time in that area. Fortunately, I grew up near New York, so I had some good stations, but, like, that was it. Like, that's all I had. That it was just radio and me just watching the clock.
Could you imagine how your mom could have impacted your user experience?
Oh my goodness. You kidding me? I could only wish.
Well, thank you, Shamir. I really appreciate your time and for bringing me on.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.